Statistically speaking, you watching this video right now either have or know someone who has a Quest 2. Also, statistically speaking, you may know more people with a Quest 2 than a Wii U. Sure, the Wii U is like notoriously a failure or whatever, but a VR headset outselling a semi-modern Nintendo console is still absolutely insane. But how did such a thing happen? How did the system that plays Angry Birds Isle of Pigs outsell a system with Smash Bros on it? And more notably, how did it outsell the only console capable of playing Super Frog HD portably in 2013? There's a whole bunch of reasons that led to the Quest 2's massive success, and it actually all starts with the original Oculus Quest. For $400, you could play VR games on a standalone device, without any need for a PC. The Quest 1 was a big success in its own way, giving a reasonably affordable way to play VR for those who didn't have the money for a VR-capable gaming PC and a headset, or those who just straight up didn't want one. There's a lot of console gamers out there. Even if only just above 1 million Quest 1s wound up being sold to date, the impressions were much bigger than that. VR was on the rise in the mass market, YouTubers contributed a great bit to the influx of new VR users, and it just generally felt like everyone, at the very least, knew what VR was and maybe called it an Oculus. And while the Quest 1 was a massive success in some ways, 1 million units still isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things. At the end of the day, VR was still seen as this super expensive enthusiast niche market that was out of reach for the average consumer. The general consensus was, and still mostly is, that the best VR experiences are on a PC. And while the Quest is a good start, ultimately the majority of the big cool experiences only existed on PC. There were a lot of games that were pretty much impossible to run on the Quest due to its ancient CPU, even for the time. That shit was like 4 years old when the Quest launched, and wow did it show. Just take a look at the Great Onward Massacre that led to the game getting downscaled on the PC version to keep it more in line with Quest. If this is the comparison on PC, just imagine what the Quest 1 version of the game looked like. Jump scare, here it is! Another problem was the choice of either buying a PC VR headset or a Quest headset. There was no way to use your Quest on a PC, so you'd either pick a $400 headset that would ultimately be an unupgradable, aging standalone machine forever, or you could wait until you had a PC capable of VR to potentially save money in the long run. So what held the Quest 1 back? Well, originally, it was the lack of PC VR support, the price was still quite high, and the power capabilities were quite low. One of these problems would be fixed in an update that introduced Oculus Link, a way of connecting your Quest to your PC, which essentially removed the problem of the user being worried about spending money on an aging headset, as it would always work on a PC, and to this day, some people still use their Quest 1s on a PC to save on money. Could you imagine using a headset this old for this long? I couldn't. That's ridiculous. I bought a Virtual Boy. So $400 for an underpowered, already aging, notoriously uncomfortable headset was the best option. The bar was in hell, by today's standards anyways. But this was exactly what was needed for the Quest successor to blossom. That and a global pandemic, but we'll come back to that. September 16th, 2020. Meta, formerly Oculus at the time, announced the Oculus Quest 2. 2K resolution per eye, up to 120Hz refresh rate, which was a giant leap from the Quest 1's 72Hz, what was essentially one of the newest Android chips available at the time, improved controllers, tracking, visuals, lenses, power. This thing was fucking crazy for a standalone device. The Quest 2 was essentially better in every way. Minus a few things like the switch to LCD panels instead of those inky black OLEDs, and it no longer had 2 headphone jacks. It only had 1. No! Did you even know the Quest 1 had 2 headphone jacks? I bet you didn't. So all these improvements, all this power, all of these capabilities, surely this thing must have been a lot more expensive than the Quest 1 since it only came out around a year after. Here's the craziest part about the Quest 2. Something to this day I still think is one of the most insane parts about this headset even now. The price was not only on par with the Quest 1, but it was $100 cheaper. How was this possible? I mean, obviously it was that Facebook money, but still, $300 for a pretty damn good headset for both PC and standalone was such an insane deal. The library of games also started off pretty strong, since the Quest 2 is capable of playing all Quest 1 games as well. And due to the much better chip, a lot more big games came to the Quest 2. Bone Lab runs and looks great on here. Asgard's Wrath 2 is a massive title, and even now, some Quest 3 games run fairly well on the Quest 2 when sideloaded. Here's Batman Arkham Shadow running pretty decently on the Quest 2. This headset became not only the best way to get into VR for someone without a PC, but the stellar price to quality ratio led to many PC VR users buying this one just due to the insane value. I had a Rift S I wanted to upgrade from due to the constant failures I was having, and wound up picking up a Quest 2 that I daily drove as my main VR headset for years. The only thing I didn't like was that I couldn't get the headset to charge while using Link, so the battery would drain a bit, albeit really slowly. I tried everything to get that headset to charge during wired Link, by the way, the Kujek cable, direct motherboard connection. Yeah bro, every fruit. If I was using wired Link, the battery simply would not go up after update version 35, I think, something like that, and it eternally pissed me off. This thing could not have launched at a better time. VR interest was at its peak, games were looking more and more enticing with things like Half-Life Alyx and Boneworks launching during this area, but the absolute best part about the Quest 2's launch was a global crisis where we were all stuck inside during 2020. Want to hang out with your friends? Well, you can't because you'll transmit a potentially deadly disease, so unironically, the next best thing to a physical hangout was virtual reality. So very many people bought headsets to have some sort of escape from being trapped inside all day. Even now, VR is still a great way to hang out with people who you maybe can't see every day. I dated this girl in high school who I couldn't see very often after I moved an hour away, and her parents never really let us hang out, so we spent a lot of time hanging out in VR like the degenerate losers we were in high school. I make VR videos now, so at least one of us is still a degenerate. I used to spend hundreds of hours in games like Rec Room, Pavlov, and Boneworks' shitty multiplayer mod Entanglement, meeting people and having some of the most fondest memories with new and old friends. Being stuck doing school online, I would skip class to go on what me and my friends would call a Rec Room adventure, or have gay little sleepovers in VR chat. I could do a whole video about this era of VR as a whole, and I probably will, but it was an era that could only exist due to how much easier it was for people to get into VR with the Quest 2 and its amazing price. The Quest 2 shot VR's popularity up tenfold, and honestly, VR wouldn't be where it is today if it wasn't for the Quest 2. It did insane things for VR as a whole, and I believe that for a brief period of time, VR was mainstream. It was, and still is in its infancy, but regardless, it was mainstream for a very brief period of time. It showed people just how magical VR is. And even if a lot of those Quest 2s sit on a shelf nowadays, there's still a giant number of people who haven't put their Quest 2s down. Even today, people who fell in love with VR after finally being able to afford one. People who can't afford a PC but still love VR. People who want to see this medium explode and grow just as much as everyone else. The Quest 2 was so successful for a variety of reasons. Big upgrades for people who are passionate about VR but can't afford something like a Valve Index, a cheaper price for Robert to finally be able to afford it with his birthday money, powerful enough that developers could port some pretty decent games to it, and VR as a whole being a great way to escape the confines of your house during a global pandemic, or to hang out with people you usually couldn't. These are all things I feel Meta forgot for a while when the Quest 3 launched. Sure, it was powerful and had upgrades like smaller controllers and pancake lenses, but it was $200 more expensive, which made it out of reach for many. The Quest 3S brought it back a bit, essentially being a more powerful Quest 2, but it doesn't have nearly as many big features added to result in it outselling the Quest 2. Mixed reality is cool and all, but a lot of people don't care for it and are just here for the virtual experiences. And they probably already have a Quest 2 that can pretty much do everything the Quest 3 can when it comes to games, minus a few exceptions like Batman and Deadpool. Ultimately, outselling the Quest 2 probably won't happen for a very long time regardless, as it really was released at the perfect time for the perfect price. Minus that brief period of time where it was $100 more expensive for no reason at all. I don't know what the fuck Meta was doing there. It was a headset that was not only excellent, but a perfect product of its time, and it still has aged gracefully.
If you want to get into VR, buying a secondhand Quest 2 on eBay for like $150 is a really great option that still holds up super well today, PC or not. As great as the Quest 2 was, for the most part, due to the lack of games, a lot of people have Quest 2s sitting on a shelf, eternally collecting dust. Which is understandable. The output of big releases definitely went down, but hey, if you have one and you haven't played it in a while, maybe give it another shot. If you have a PC, play Vertigo 2. If you don't, try out Arizona Sunshine 2, Forefront, or Compound. These are great, more niche games that are absolutely worth some love. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one where I talk about flat screen games that got ported. It's great. You can get 10% off any game in the Quest store using the link in the description. It's unironically the best way to support the channel, and you get a discount. Or you could just show your love by subscribing. That's nice too. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will catch you in the next one. Fat bitches. Lops and kisses. Bye-bye.